Hey there, Keith from Cutlass at Board Games here. And the last couple of videos that I've uploaded have included a bunch of Blood on the Clocktower content. Um, for those of you that don't know me, I've played a lot of Blood on the Clocktower historically and part of the Sydney scene, which has been running for a really long time now. And I originally posted a video where I went and talked about a bunch of unboxing stuff, and I was like, hey, actually, here's my grimoire, this is what all the components look like, and everyone was really, really into it. So then I was like, hey, I'll make some more Clocktower content. And then I made a video which was about talking about different rank ups in Trouble Brewing and how to try to make a balanced game and what kind of different things that you can do with different characters in the setup phase to make the game feel like it's balanced. And then now what I'm doing now, this is the next what I feel like is the next step in that thought, in that line of thinking when it comes to building games of Trouble Brewing. And this is going to be a meta-analysis of the characters of Trouble Brewing. And before we get started, we're going to go, what is meta? Keith, please explain the strange word that you're using. I'm going to contextualize it a little bit for you, where in Magic the Gathering, right, meta tends to be the top percentage of most commonly done things. So in a particular format, there's a certain amount of resources that are available for everybody to use, and through constant use of this limited pool of resources, people naturally deviate to what's more successful. And then you'll have other people that attempt to find things that beat the stuff that is been proven to be successful, trying to create a rock paper scissors kind of a rotating effect there. And I believe Clocktower has something similar, but in a little bit of a different way. What Clocktower has is a logical deduction of what's potentially happened in the game. And because some characters aren't used as frequently as others, and because we can make assumptions about the skill level of the player group, some things aren't likely to happen. Which means that you can make judgments based on what you believe is going to be in the game, based on this information. But then also, as a storyteller, you can use this information to set up games that are going to be uncommon and harder to solve for veteran players while still being balanced for regular players. Players never played before in Clocktower, always played less than 3 games, is going to come in, they're still trying to figure out what their characters do. They're trying to find one person to trust. Do I trade my information? What am I doing? Right? And a veteran player is like building this universe of an argument, trying to figure out who is on what team and what I'm doing. And then you're able to easily disrupt that. When the case that I think is funny is I've very verbally in the past voiced how much I dislike the butler as a character. And I've played games with people where they've been like, where I've either been the butler or I've bluffed as the butler for something, and people have reacted in a way they're like, there's like no way you would actually be the butler. This is like you're having a joke. There's no way this could be sincere or whatever. Or I would try and spin it the other way around. And it's like, look, there's no way I would bluff as the butler. I have to, I'm stuck being this stupid thing. And that's me leaning into an existing narrative of information outside of that particular game, um, which generally I wouldn't recommend. But sometimes you can make analysis of these kinds of things, and the point of this video is to make you as a storyteller or as a player try and set up games that aren't leaning into existing knowledge. So I'm going to cut over to this. So this is a Photoshop document that I have set up. Let me just quickly move everything to the right a little bit because my camera's in the way. My fortune teller, empath, and chef icons need to come back a little bit. So this is all the old icons for Trouble Brewing that I realized I still had on my computer. And what we're going to do is we're going to go through each one and we're going to kind of talk about a few different things. one of the first and most obvious things is going to be how often this character shows up in a game of Trouble Brewing. Alright, what I might do is I'll quickly group these up so it doesn't get too messy. I'm going to make my text not white so that you can actually see it. I'm going to start with Imp. The Imp shows up 100% of the time in Trouble Brewing. It is the only character that is always there. My font size needs to be this big. This is probably fine. Okay, alright, so the Imp shows up 100% of the time. And then now if you look at the minions, you're going to see a spy maybe 1 in 100 games. I've played the spy maybe exactly one time, or I've played as the Widow, which does a very similar thing. I've only been shown a grimoire by a storyteller in the game one time. I have run probably less than 3 spy games. I remember one of them was a super advanced script where the spy was poisoned or something, and I took all the characters out of the grimoire and I offered them a plate of biscuits. I put a bunch of mint slice in the grimoire. I was like, well, and it's just such an underplayed character for how fantastic it is, right? And I personally think it's very fun. And as a storyteller, you get a lot of freedom with what you can do with it, and as a player, you get a lot of freedom with what you can do with them. You should play more of a spy, right? And there's probably some ways to do that to make it easier for new players, or some ways to do that to make it not game breakingly insane for veteran players as well, right? But we're gonna I might just rearrange these a little bit. Grab the spy icon. Let's try and keep this line. It's re-alphabetized, even though I wanted to keep it separate from minions and demons. Bam. Okay, so let's pretend, for the sake of ease, that I've played 1,000 games of Trouble Brewing, and I've never been a spy, and I've run the spy like 3 times. We're gonna see the spy basically never. Basically never. If you're playing at an event, like a lot of the meetups that we have in Sydney, they do this thing where they have 1 and then 2 groups, and the 2 groups are split up into beginners and veterans, and the beginners play Trouble Brewing, and usually the first game is Trouble Brewing, and then they split, right? And then the veterans go and play not Trouble Brewing. So you don't get to see more advanced versions of Trouble Brewing, more complicated rack ups or stuff like that. So we don't see the spy get played. And then between the other ones, I'd say the poison is probably the most likely. It's probably like maybe like 40%. I mean, the percentages are by category, by the way, because they're the options that you have when you're setting up a script. So with the imps, there's only 1 demon option, so it's 100%. If we did this for S and V, each of the 4 different demons would be broken up into one pie. With this, we have the spy basically taking up no space. We have the poisoner that I reckon is probably most of the time. The Scarlet Woman, which is probably like the next biggest percentage, honestly, at like 32 or so. It's just me making a judgment. I obviously haven't. From memory, there is actually like play stats. They did actually record a bunch of stats in play testing, but this is not a statistical analysis of the characters put into the game. This is a meta-analysis of what it feels like you would have to deal with. So if we're playing Magic the Gathering, going back to my original contextual example, and you go, okay, I need to beat this one deck because it's the thing that shows up all the time, and that's the one that you care about, right? And then your next list of things that you care about is just stuff that you would see more often. You personally, you would see more often, because contextually, the meta cares about what you are doing as a player, not what every single game on the planet is happening. So what you'll see at your local game store versus what you'll see online, or what you'll see when you invite 7 friends to your house, is going to be very different. and you'll be making a different analysis based on that, based on their skill levels, all this kind of stuff, which I think is very, very similar to Magic. So the Baron is basically the remainder percentage, which, and you get to watch me struggle to do some maths, is like 27.999, I want to say. That's where I embarrassed myself by getting the calculator out. 40 plus 32 plus 27.999. Yeah. Yeah, I nailed it. Okay. So this is how I feel like the minion split is, right? So Baron is really bad at some play counts. 8 and 12 have 2 minions. If you put in the Baron, you have a butler in the game. Oh shit, I don't want to do that. So it is pretty unlikely that you'll have a 4 outsider game because the Baron will be put into play. So when you have a big game like 12, um, and you know you're picking your minions, it's pretty unlikely that we'll see a Baron there. And then the spy basically never shows up, and the poisoner, because the poisoner is, I feel really balanced in a small game and a big game, right? That it's going to be the most popular pick. And then the Scarlet Woman really only has 2 days to activate in a 7-player game. So it's going to be less likely to have a Scarlet Woman show up in a really small game. So I think this feels pretty accurate. I'm happy for you to get in the comments and flame me and completely disagree, but this is what I'm seeing from long time playing at the horse and long time playing at other events and stuff that I've been to. That this is kind of what it feels like, right? And so when I'm setting up games, I have this in mind. And some of the other storytellers that I've been with, they're gonna be like, "Well, we're gonna do something different. I'm gonna try this new thing. I'm gonna try and do that. I'm gonna try and mix things up with this." And I think that's a good mindset to be in, because it means that you never feel like you're playing the exact same game over and over again, which is important. But it also means that new and interesting things are going to happen. Some of the ridiculous things that I've pulled off in games could only happen because I was put in a circumstance where I had that option. I had, access to those things. So now I'm going to do Outsiders. Outsiders is really funny because it looks like this. The Drunk is the best outsider in the game. Most of the other ones are pretty rubbish. And then it's probably like this. And then we're gonna have like 3.999%, and you guessed it, 0.001% of games have bother in them. Now, if you're playing games fresh out the box, right? You have no idea what any of these characters do, what's good or what's bad. It's pretty likely that you'll be playing some of these things and be like, "Oh my god, wow, okay." Or you'll look at stuff and you go, "Oh, that's too hard." Like I can imagine some first-time storytellers seeing the spy and being like, "Oh, I'm not really sure how I'm supposed to run this as a storyteller." Or seeing the Baron and being like, "I just put in 2 extra characters and then what, the bag comes back with 2 extra characters? Oh no, wait, hang on, I have to replace things." And like, if you haven't gone through and read all the documentation and tutorials and that kind of stuff and how to set up and play stuff, and some of these might seem daunting, right? Like, some of us that learned to storytell in the wild just had some dude tell you things. That was it. My learning to run games as a storyteller was like 5 minutes of "please don't damage the grimoire. We put so much time and effort into building these. Let's eat gelato." I was like, okay. That was like most of it. Weirdly. And so like you pick up a lot of stuff by shadowing people, watching them do things and stuff like that. And so if you're shadowing someone, if that's how you learn, right? You learn because you watch somebody else do it, and then the choices that they're making are the choices that you're now making, right? So if that person that taught you how to storytell had an inherent bias towards one of these characters, you might have that same bias. and that means that how you're going to run a game is going to be different. All right, I'm going to close these so that doesn't get too messy, and then we're going to go to our townsfolk. I'm going to try and move these around so I have a bit better space. A bit better space. It like weirdly alphabetized everything. And then I had to move it all because my camera's in the way. That's okay. That's fine. Make a second row here. Slayer. Washerwoman. Virgin. Undertaker. Soldier. Probably a bit cramped, but whatever. Whatever. That's fine. It's not like I'm publishing this document anyways. This is just for you to look at it for the video. So let's start with the Ravenkeeper. Now, the Ravenkeeper is a very passive character, and I feel like a lot of the times the Ravenkeeper ends in it has three possible outcomes. The Ravenkeeper doesn't die, and the Ravenkeeper is alive on final day, and their ability never activates, and then no one believes that they're the Ravenkeeper. You then have the Ravenkeeper did die, and actually got info, which I have not seen that many times. Or an evil player was bluffing as the Ravenkeeper. The Ravenkeeper was given to the demon as one of the bluffs. Because there's a thing the imp can do where the imp targets themselves, dies at night. Somebody else becomes the imp goes, oh, yeah, I was the Ravenkeeper. This person that just became the imp, I trust them with my life. They are this thing. And veteran players that have seen that happen before are like, sure. Convenient. Whereas as a Ravenkeeper, you want to hit an evil player and be like, yeah, okay, this guy needs to die. And so in that three different options, right? I think I've seen a Ravenkeeper successfully activate very, very infrequently compared to it being alive on final day. In a spy game, a Ravenkeeper should never die at night. But I feel like the Ravenkeeper is given as bluffs more often than it's actually in play. I feel like it's a really passive character. If you're trying to avoid having too many passive characters in your rack up, this might be one that you can't, or the soldier might be one that you can't. And I think the soldier is very similar as well, where it's pretty rare that it will activate at night and there's no death, and everyone's like, oh, well, there must be a protector. But it's a 50-50 because it could be the monk. It's a really, really common demon bluff to be given. And so I think both of those are going to end up on the low end. So I have to split all my percentages by 13. So everything's going to be less than 10%. So these are probably like 3%. Alright? Can I get my text back? Okay. Looking at like 3%. Also, if you were laughing at me struggling to figure out how the minions added up, just you wait and see until I struggle to add all the townsfolk together. Because I believe the soldier and the Ravenkeeper are both infrequently used, but not super uncommon, because you'll have one or the other most of the time. I feel like you'll have one or the other most of the time. The Virgin is super common, and then I think top four, right? You're going to have one of the top four, but the Librarian is really rare of the four, right? So the Investigator, Chef, and Washwoman are going to be your big ones. So they're going to get like a full-on 8% each. And I think that's going to be the largest share. I pray I'm doing these maths correctly. In my head, I'm like, there's 13 characters. That means that if something is above 10, something has to be below 1%. Anyway, and I think they're the most common, and then the Librarian is the least common of the top four, because you'll have play accounts where there's no outsiders. But and I said this in my my other video, it would be hilarious if you had a setup where there was supposed to be no outsiders by default, and you just have a librarian that gets a 0. Or like all that really does is shuts down any potential. Oh my god, it could be the drunk. It's the Baron in play. And the librarian, like no. If there's a drunk in play, it has to be me. Which I think would be interesting. But I haven't seen that. I've only ever seen a librarian get a 0 one time. Um, which I think I was storytelling. I think I gave the librarian a 0 in a game where there was outsiders because they were poisoned, and I felt like it was me telling them that there is a poisoner in the game. They became a bad investigator. I don't know that that was probably a great choice. That's just how I remember it going down. Um, but it is an option, and I have not otherwise really seen that happen. Right, each of these characters, as a storyteller setup, you have to kind of know what kind of outcomes it could have. The librarian successfully hits a target, the librarian unsuccessfully hits a target because they had misinformation, or the librarian scans a 0. And you get to choose because the spy exists, so you can intentionally have the librarian scan an incorrect target, or you can, using the drunk, make it scan an incorrect target. The librarian being drunk, picking 2 people, and seeing the drunk is really, really common. It's just like a big misinformation thing because people are like, oh, I doubt all my information. I probably only do that if all of the evil players are super beginner. We've then got something about each night info characters. So actually, what I might do is save myself some embarrassment. I might just add up what I've got on the side. We're at 33%. So I think like this is the biggest chunk of characters, top 4. I think the mayor is pretty underplayed. I think the monk is probably similar to the soldier, but maybe like slightly more so. Maybe we go like 4% here. Because, and obviously my personal preference is choosing stuff that gives players agency over stuff that doesn't give players agency. If I'm running Trouble Brewing and I'm like, this setup needs a protector, I choose monk over soldier, right? Because I'm giving a player something to do at night, rather than a player that sits there and is like, yes, shoot me. We've then got the mayor. The mayor is an interesting one. I feel like it's relatively underplayed. The mayor has a few different outcomes. The mayor is targeted at night and bounces to something else. The mayor is targeted at night and dies. Mayor is victory condition triggers on the final day because they convince everyone to not execute, which is pretty rare because an alive demon either gives up or outs themselves to try and stop it, which is really tough. If the demon can't build a narrative where the mayor is not the mayor, they're stuck. And actually, I saw that recently. We had player seeding, which was the empath, the Ravenkeeper that didn't die, and the mayor. And the empath was a claim of the demon, and they, at no point until final day, neighbored the mayor. And I'm like, look, the empath needs to tell us how they think that the mayor is the demon with whatever information they've got. Otherwise, we execute that player and win. And then everyone's like, I don't understand. And then I'm like, okay, then now we're going to wait for the empath to nominate the mayor because he loses if he doesn't. And it kind of forces you into a corner without its ability activating. So its ability activating is unlikely, but the pressure that it puts on the evil team on the final day is very, very strong, and I feel like that should not go understated. And then the other thing is that if it's poisoned, if you have like a poisoner imp mare final 3 and the poisoner has poisoned the mare, they're like, sure, whatever you want, do whatever you want, we don't care, it's fine, go for it. Yeah, it's all mare victory, that'll be hilarious. And I feel like the evil team could be like publicly evil at that point as well. But I'm gonna say Mare is pretty low. Mare is probably also 3%. I don't think we have something that's lower than 3%. I'm probably gonna end up bumping these 8s up a little bit, the way things are going. And then we're gonna have Empath and Fortune Teller, which are in most of the games. Probably actually throw out some 10s here. because I have a lot free. I feel like I'm undervaluing a lot of these things. I'm like undercutting the percentage so I don't go over accidentally. But the empath I think is the number one each night character that shows up in most. I'm gonna throw it in a 20. Um, it's either in play or is a demon bluff. I think the version is pretty common as well. What I might do is I might throw some down and then I'll go back and talk to it once I've got my numbers correct. I think the fortune teller is 10 as well. So I'm gonna add 10, we're at 76. And then if I add 6, we're at 82. That seems about right. Okay, so I'm gonna make these 10s as well. And then we're at 82. Which means there's 18 left. No, it's not 9% between them. I think we've got like, I think the Slayer is pretty underplayed, and I think the Undertaker is the least likely of the each night characters to show up. I think it's probably tied with the Monk. I'm gonna go 4 plus 4. Trying to make this as mathematically accurate as possible while also having no clue what I'm talking about. It's really impressive. And I think the Slayer's a great character, but it's also like a really YOLO character. Slayer, right? It activates on the Recluse, activates on the Demon. Okay, activates on the Recluse are really rare and probably shouldn't be done most of the time. Activates on the Demon and activates and hits nothing, which like in this order from most common to least common. But I don't know. I think that's probably. I think also a 4% is pretty likely. Like we're more likely to see. I might go and adjust some of these because it's really difficult to do such a large sample size all at once. And then I have 10% to play with, so I might actually up these to 13, and I get to throw in a 1% somewhere else, which is probably like this. I'm pretty happy with that. Okay, so now we're going to talk about how this breaks down. Now we can compare directly how often these things show up. Like for example, you're more likely to see an Undertaker than a soldier. That feels pretty reasonable to say out loud. You're likely to see a Washwoman more than an Undertaker. Yes, without a doubt, for sure. Same goes for any of the top 4 characters. Yep, I'm pretty confident that I'm going to see them. Am I more likely to see a monk than a mayor? Yeah, I'm pretty confident in saying that's accurate. Am I more likely to see a fortune teller than a monk? Yeah, probably. Right. Now, knowing this kind of a thing, you can build a hierarchy of what characters are seen all of the time, and you could just change one thing. You could go, okay, I realize I've put an empath into every single one of my games lately. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take out the empath, and I'm going to put in something else, like the Slayer. I'm going to start playing the Slayer more than the empath, right? And you try and build games where the characters aren't just all uncommon characters you don't use very often, but you're giving these different characters more time in the sun, so to say. You're finding new combinations of things, right? So if we use this exact grid, right, to build a 7-player game, the 7-player game has an imp. The 7-player game has a let's say 8 because then I get to pick an outsider. Has a poisoner, has a drunk. That's 3. Then we got an empath for sure. We have a chef and a washwoman. I probably wouldn't do all 3 top 8. And then we get a fortune teller, and then we grab one of the small percent ones, which is probably the Slayer. That's our 8-player game, right? That's our most common 8-player game. Because I wouldn't put the Virgin in, I wouldn't put some of these things in there for such a small game, as well as
But then when you're looking at that, like that sounds pretty common because a lot of these characters we will have seen a lot, and people have probably played in that exact game or whatever. You know what I mean? Putting the poison and the drunk together in the same game could be brutal, could be not brutal, depending on how many info or whatever characters you have, where they land, where everything hits. And then like using this, you go, okay, what am I gonna do differently? What am I gonna am I gonna start learning how to use the spy effectively as a storyteller? How am I going to um, set it up so that it's good for different kinds of players? How am I going to use the butler in a game where it feels like it has an impact and it does something for that player? Because the way I see it, right, you have the butler, the raven keeper, the virgin, and the washwoman, all which are supposed to do a very similar thing. They pick one person and then they choose to trust that person. If the raven keeper hits a townsfolk, the butler just has to go on a social read, which is probably the hardest one. The virgin knows for certain whether or not they can trust the person that nominated them, and the washwoman, depending on how they trade information, get to be confident as to whether or not that it hit or it didn't hit, or whoops, I scanned a spy or whatever. But how often do you go up to someone with your washwoman info and you go, "Oh, hey, are you this thing?" And they're like, "Yes," and they say that because they are the spy, right? Like never, right? I That's never happened to me. It would be great if it did. From one legend to another, that would be amazing. Um, and these are the kinds of things that you're trying to build as a storyteller. What what I remember most fondly of playing this game a lot is you'll go and see people that you haven't played with a long time, and something will come up, and people will talk about a past game, and everyone has that one good story that they told about a great game that they played. In my other video, I talked about one where I was the pit hag. In this video, I'm going to give you a new SNV one where I was the Fangu and I targeted a dead outsider, killing myself. And I claimed to be the sage that had died, and the only minion that was active was the evil twin. And I picked two people that weren't the twins. And I said, look, it has to be a Vortox game, and it has to be the good twin who is the Vortox. Um, and the evil twin is actually a different minion. And everyone's information made no sense because I was now the demon that was dead, and no one had really known that the Fangu could target a dead outsider and do that. That, as far as I know, had never happened before because I mentioned it to Steve Medway, and he was like, "What the hell?" And everyone was like, "Okay, well, that has to be the case. All of our info makes no sense because we were really confident you were the demon." And all these things kind of happened, kind of happened all together. And I had an I became the dead evil outsider, and the dead outsider became the dead evil demon, and I got an extra vote on my team, and we ended up winning by executing the good twin. And so like that, telling that story, and everyone else has their own crazy story. That story came from a really weird edge case of a collection of characters that people interacted in a way that people weren't expecting, right? And this is kind of what you want to build for your players. You want to be like, oh man, we had it solved. We knew it. Final day, we were so confident that this was what was going to happen. But everything relied on this one piece of information being true, and the player was actually the spy or whatever. The player bluffing as the butler was actually the slayer, or something ridiculous that you wouldn't expect to happen. And your job as a storyteller is to make people have fun playing this game. And if you're running games that are 80% the same every single time, I'm not saying it'll get stale, but people will be able to counter arguments based on their experience. Like if you come out and claim the butler, they're going to be much more um, dismissive of you and less likely to trust you than if they've seen a butler in every single game. Like if they know for a fact that you as a storyteller put a butler in every single game as your favorite character, you love it to death. The butler's in the game. When someone comes out as the butler, people go, yeah, okay, sure, whatever. That doesn't prevent me from playing the game, but I am also not gonna sit here and think that you're lying to me. Whereas in most of the Sydney climate, if you played in a Trouble Brewing game and you're like, I'm the butler, people are like, okay, that's pretty unlikely. That doesn't happen very often. I'm pretty suspicious of you. What's the play count? Oh, there's supposed to be no outsiders. Sure. Trying to convince me there's a Baron in play. We already have two other people claiming outsider. Stuff like that. Um, and then trying to find new ways to use characters that are uncommon, like having a mayor in such a way that you just with you, like you can't stop them from being executed, but you can stop them from dying from the demon. And when the demon does target them, you get to pick who dies, and you could bounce it to an evil player if you really think the good team needs that much help. And then you build this climactic final day where the mayor is a centerpiece, and everyone's like, nominations now really matter, or whatever. Or you have like a monk that just really is popping off the whole time, or a spy that bluffs as a character like the Undertaker or whatever and gets the information super good the entire time and is super trusted because there's no virgin, there's no washwoman that is gonna have another more trusted pair, right? Spy comes out, all the information is really good. On the first day they execute the chef. The chef doesn't claim to anybody. The spy comes up to them and goes, "Hey, I'm the Undertaker. I know you were the chef. What info did you get?" Chef's like, "Okay, I trust this man with my life," you know. And then the spy gets in the ear of everyone in the town, and they're like, "Okay, great, and I trust this guy because when he died, I learned that he was this thing. He had information about this guy. We now trust him. This Slayer slayed this person and missed, and then we executed them. And I know that they're the Slayer. I trust them, and I now trust the person they haven't targeted. And then I got this piece of information from somewhere else that the imp is not the imp. The imp is whatever their bluff is." And then everyone's like, "Okay, I trust this guy because he's done such good work so far." And they get to the end of the game, and everyone's like, "Wow, you played me so hard." And that's the kind of story that you're trying to create here, right? But that's never going to happen if the spy is never in the game. That you can't like it's not going to exist, right? It's something that you need to give your players the opportunity to experiment with, to fail. Like I mean, I fuck up games all the time. You can run a game that doesn't go to plan. You can run a game that falls apart, and you can run a game not understand how the characters go and go, "Oh man, I messed up. I need a re-rack," or "I'm sorry, I'm gonna have to shut the game down. We're gonna start again," and the player's gonna be like, "Whatever, that's fine. It happens. It happens." Right? It's a very complicated game. People make mistakes all the time, and you're not gonna learn if you're not taking risks. And Trouble Brewing is my favorite set. And it's probably hard to believe because all of the characters I think work in their own harmony. There's no like in Bad Moon Rising, for example, there's minion and demon combos together that are just like bonkers powerful that swing a game hugely in some way, and some that feel like really really strong and others that don't. And then you as a storyteller, you're like, how do I put this together so it doesn't like suck for one team? Whereas Trouble Brewing, I think, doesn't have that. Trouble Brewing is the set where you can kind of throw in anything and hope for the best. And the counter argument to that I make in my other video is where if you don't give the good team enough info beyond the first day, they'll stand around and do nothing, and the evil team will win doing nothing. And that's a super anticlimactic game, not very fun to be in. But it's pretty close to that level, right? In theory, if you were playing a 10-player game, right, so you have your demon, your two minions, no outsiders, and you grab 7 townsfolk. If you have a look, my entire left column is there's 7 there. If you grabbed every character from the entire left-hand column, is that a balanced game? Okay, we've got 3 first night info characters, 2 each night info characters, a protector, and the mayor. I'd play that game. That looks fine, right? So in theory, you could grab a random rack, or you could plan and build something more interesting than that. You could set up some cool interactions with the spy because it doesn't get seen very often. You could put the butler in a really interesting situation because you know what I've never seen before? Librarian confirms the butler makes the librarian their master, and these two are tight like this the whole game, and they run it, right? When is that ever going to happen if no one plays the butler, right? These are all things that you as a storyteller have to be thinking about, creating some of these things, right? Because that combo can't happen if you don't set up a librarian that sees a butler. both relatively underplayed characters. Now, that could be really strong. That could break the game. They could have this insane trust circle where like the mayor comes up to them and he's like, "Hey, look, I'm the mayor. I'm gonna trust you, my one friend, librarian." The librarian's like, "Well, actually, I scanned the butler. I talked to them and they trust me implicitly because I saw them as the butler and no one is gonna bluff as the butler. So let's do it." And then now they have this indefensible trust triangle, right? The mayor can't die. The other two people vote as a block, and stuff like that. But the player behavior is influenced by the options that you give them. And I think that's important. And that's kind of everything I wanted to cover. If you thought this was really cool or interesting and you like hearing me rant about stuff like this, leave a comment, hit that subscribe button, um, leave me an angry message or something. Because yeah, I enjoy playing this game. I enjoy making this content, and if you have any questions and stuff, I'll answer questions in the comments. Obviously, if you're like, "Keith, you're totally wrong about this thing. It's 12%, not a 13%." There's going to be stuff that's your opinion, and there's going to be stuff that I, can't defend or will defend. But I'm definitely curious about what your experience has been. Do you have a play group that plays the Baron every single round or plays the Spy all the time? Because I want to hear about that. Because I want to be in that group. I haven't. It's not been my experience. But anyway, that's enough out of me. Hopefully, I'll catch you next time.